Have you ever noticed that Jesus never seemed to be in a hurry, even when desperate crowds surrounded him? There were people crying, sick, exhausted, begging for help, and yet, throughout the Gospels, Jesus never seemed controlled by panic, pressure, or urgency. While everyone around him was gripped by fear and anxiety, he walked calmly, slowly, deliberately. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this: in some of the most painful moments, Jesus said nothing. Why? Why did Jesus never run when people were suffering? Why did he remain calm amidst the chaos? And what do Jesus' silence and slow way of walking reveal about the emotional pain, spiritual anxiety, and weariness that so many people feel today? You've probably experienced moments when life seemed too heavy, moments when you prayed for answers, asked God for guidance, and heard only silence. Perhaps you've wondered why God seems silent while you're suffering. Maybe you've thought, why am I suffering if God sees my pain? If this sounds familiar to you, stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover in these hidden details of Jesus' life may completely change the way you see suffering, waiting, and God's timing. In the Bible, we constantly see crowds pressing on Jesus. The disciples were worried, sick people waited, families were desperate, but Jesus never swayed by anxiety. He never allowed the pressure from people to override the Father's guidance. Even in silence, Jesus was teaching something powerful about faith, patience, emotional healing, and God's peace in the midst of chaos. And the more you observe these silent moments in the Gospels, the more you begin to realize that perhaps Jesus was revealing a hidden truth about suffering, something that most people still haven't grasped to this day. And perhaps that's precisely why so many people connect so deeply with these quiet moments of Jesus, because, on some level, we've all felt the weight of waiting, of pain, and of silence. We've all had nights when it felt like God was distant, while our hearts were filled with unanswered questions. And yet, there's something in Jesus' stillness that continues to bring peace to broken people even today. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. I'd love to know if you've ever experienced a moment where you felt God was silent while you were suffering, or if you've ever perceived Jesus' calmness in the Gospels in a different way. Sometimes, your comment might be exactly the message someone else needed to read today. If this type of message helps you see the Bible in a deeper way, please like this video. It may seem simple, but your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. When you like, comment, and interact, YouTube understands that this message needs to reach more people who are also struggling with anxiety, emotional pain, fear, and spiritual doubts. And if you want to continue discovering the hidden meanings behind Jesus' gestures, silences, and attitudes, subscribe now to the Jesus Beyond Words channel. Because here, every detail of the Gospels reveals something that many people have gone their whole lives without realizing. And what's most striking is that one of the strongest examples of this appears precisely at a moment when everyone around Jesus was desperate, but he continued walking slowly, as if he were trying to teach something that almost no one could understand at that moment. There's a historical detail in the Gospels that almost no one notices, but which completely changes how we understand Jesus' behavior. In the Jewish culture of the time, rabbis typically walked alongside their disciples slowly and deliberately. Teaching didn't only happen in temples or public speeches. Many of the most important lessons were conveyed during the walk. The pace was part of the teaching. Haste was seen as distraction, lack of control, lack of direction. And perhaps that's exactly why Jesus never seemed to act driven by the chaos around him. While crowds pressed, shouted, and desperately tried to touch him, Jesus continued walking with purpose. This wasn't a lack of concern, it was a completely different mindset from ours. Today, we live a routine dominated by urgency. Everything needs to happen quickly. Decisions are made on impulse. Anxiety controls emotions, thoughts, and even our faith. But Jesus seemed to reveal a hidden truth in every silent step he took. Those who know the Father's direction don't need to chase after control. And when you start to observe certain moments in the Gospels, this becomes even more powerful. Think of Jairus, for example. His daughter was dying. Every second mattered. Anyone would panic. But along the way, Jesus stops to listen to a woman who had suffered for years with a flow of blood. Humanly speaking, that seemed like an absurd delay. While everyone was worried about time, Jesus was concerned with something greater. And even before they arrived at Jairus' house, the news arrived: your daughter is dead. Imagine the emotional impact of that moment. Imagine the confusion in Jairus' mind. Perhaps he thought Jesus had taken too long. Perhaps he felt the same silent frustration that many people feel today when God doesn't act at the expected time. And yet, Jesus remained calm. The same thing happens in the story of Lazarus. Jesus receives news that his friend is ill, and decides to wait 2 more days before going to him. It seems strange, doesn't it? It seems almost incomprehensible. But there is a profound revelation hidden in these gospel accounts that begins to show that Jesus' delays may never have been real delays. Comment below, this makes sense to me. There is a huge difference between ignoring people's pain and allowing oneself to be controlled by their pressure. And Jesus understood this like no one else. At no point in the Gospels does he treat human suffering with coldness. Jesus wept with those who wept, touched the forgotten, listened to the rejected, and saw pain that no one else perceived. But at the same time, he never allowed the emotional urgency of the crowds to replace the Father's guidance. This is one of the strongest and most transformative truths hidden in the way Jesus walked. Jesus moved slowly because he trusted God completely. This phrase changes everything when you really stop to think about it. Jesus didn't move slowly because he was indifferent. He moved calmly because he fully trusted in God. And perhaps that's exactly what's most lacking in our generation. Today, the whole world lives at an accelerated pace. There's a constant feeling that we're behind in life. People are afraid of missing opportunities, afraid of falling behind, afraid of not being able to control the future. Anxiety has become part of the routine. The mind never slows down, the heart is always tired. And in the midst of this silent pressure, many people make decisions driven by panic, not peace. But Jesus reveals a different mindset. While the world moves through fear, Jesus moved through purpose. While people reacted to chaos, he responded with direction. And this had a profound impact on everyone around him. Because true calm doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from the confidence that God remains in control even when everything seems out of place. Perhaps that's why the disciples often didn't understand Jesus. They saw the pressure of the moment. Jesus saw something greater happening behind the scenes. They saw delay. Jesus saw purpose. They wanted immediate answers. Jesus was building transformation within people even before changing external circumstances. And perhaps this is one of the hardest revelations to accept. God isn't always in a hurry to remove pain, because sometimes he's using the journey to change something within us first. And when you begin to understand this, you realize that Jesus' silence never meant absence. It meant that something deeper was happening behind what everyone could see at that moment. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. The most difficult moments to understand in Jesus' life are precisely those in which he seemed too silent. There are scenes in the Gospels where everything seems urgent, heavy, and emotionally unbearable, but Jesus remains silent. And when we glance quickly at these stories, it's easy to think that he was distant, taking too long, or simply not reacting in the expected way. But there is a hidden truth in these moments that completely changes how we perceive pain, waiting, and even our own prayers. Think about the number of people who are emotionally exhausted today. People who have been praying for months, maybe years, waiting for an answer from God. People who try to stay strong on the outside, but inside are drained, full of doubts, trying to understand why certain doors don't open, why some pains persist, and why God seems silent precisely during the most difficult moments of the journey. And perhaps what hurts the most is not just the suffering, but the feeling that heaven is silent. But when you observe Jesus in the Gospels, you begin to realize that his silence was never empty. There was always something happening behind the scenes. There was direction. There was purpose. There was transformation being built in a way that no one could see at that moment. The silence of Jesus was never empty. It was full of purpose. This phrase carries an absurd depth, because many times we want immediate answers, but God is working on levels that our limited vision cannot yet reach. Delay never meant abandonment. When Jesus took a long time to reach Lazarus, it seemed too late. When he stopped on the way to Jairus' house, it seemed irresponsible. When he remained silent in the face of certain people's pain, it seemed like absence. But in all these moments, something greater was being prepared. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this message so powerful today. Because there are people watching this video who have already begun to believe that God has forgotten them. People who have silently lost hope. People who continue to function on the outside, but are emotionally broken on the inside. And even without realizing it, they are experiencing the same emotional conflict as many biblical characters, trying to understand a God who doesn't always respond as quickly as we expect. But the more you delve into these accounts, the more you realize that Jesus was never late. He was guiding each situation toward a purpose that was yet to be revealed. Comment below. I needed to hear that today. One of the hardest things for human beings is accepting that God sees life from a completely different angle than we do. We see the present. God sees the whole picture. We feel the pressure of the moment. God knows the impact of every detail of the journey. And perhaps that is precisely why Jesus was never swayed by the anxiety of the crowd. While everyone was focused on the urgency of suffering, he was connected to the Father's will. And this completely changes how we understand suffering. Because, for those who are suffering, everything seems urgent. Emotional pain seems urgent. The answer to prayer seems urgent. Healing seems urgent. Change seems urgent. When the heart is weary, each day weighs more than it should. Each silence seems longer. Each delay seems like rejection. But Jesus showed, through the way he walked, that calmness does not mean indifference. Silence does not mean absence. And delay does not mean abandonment. Your pain may feel urgent to you, but God still sees the full picture. There is a very profound truth to this, because often we want God to immediately resolve what is hurting our soul, but we don't realize that there are spiritual things happening behind the scenes beyond what we can see. Sometimes, God isn't ignoring your pain. He is preparing something within you while guiding the situation toward a greater purpose. And this requires a very difficult mindset transformation in today's world. The world has taught people to live in a fast-paced world. Everything revolves around quick results, instant decisions, and immediate answers. People are emotionally exhausted because they live trying to control time, the future, and circumstances. But Jesus reveals another way, a way where peace comes before the answer, where trust comes before the miracle, where God's guidance is worth more than the pressure from people. The kingdom of God moves with purpose, not anxiety. And perhaps that's what Jesus was trying to teach without needing to say many words. The way he walked was already a message. His silence already carried revelations. Each pause, each wait, and each apparent delay hid a truth that continues to impact lives to this day. God never loses control of history, even when everything seems confusing to us. And when that truth begins to sink into the heart, something changes within us, because perhaps the greatest miracle is not just the change in circumstances, but the transformation that God works within someone as they learn to trust during the waiting. Write this down: God is still in control. The greatest invitation hidden in Jesus' silences is not only to understand suffering, but to learn a new way of walking through life. When we observe Jesus in the Gospels, we realize that he never tried to compete with the speed of the world around him. While everyone was chasing after immediate answers, he remained connected to the Father's direction. While people lived dominated by pressure, confusion, and fear of tomorrow, Jesus walked with a peace that seemed impossible to shake. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this message so necessary today. We live in a weary generation. People are emotionally overwhelmed, mentally exhausted, and spiritually confused. People trying to solve everything at once, carrying silent pains that no one sees. The whole world seems to push people toward a fast-paced life, where slowing down has become almost a sign of weakness. But Jesus shows the opposite. There is strength in trusting. There is wisdom in waiting. There is transformation in continuing to walk with faith even when there are still no clear answers. Jesus said nothing, yet that silent moment may explain the pain, confusion, and waiting you're living through right now. Perhaps you are experiencing exactly this kind of moment, a period in which God seems too silent, a phase in which things haven't happened the way you expected, and the more time passes, the more questions arise in your mind. But the Gospels reveal something very powerful. Jesus' silence was never a lack of care. Often, it was precisely in the quietest moments that God was guiding the most important events behind the scenes. And that changes everything. Because when you understand that God is still guiding even in silence, waiting ceases to be just suffering and begins to become part of the journey. Jesus' calmness begins to teach how to survive modern chaos without losing faith, without losing direction, and without letting anxiety control the heart. Perhaps the true miracle hidden in these stories was never just what Jesus did in the end, but who the people became as they learned to trust in him along the way. And the more you look at these seemingly simple details in the Gospels, the more you realize that Jesus was teaching much more through the way he walked than through the words he spoke. Comment below: I choose to trust. And perhaps, after all this, the big question isn't just why Jesus walked slowly, but whether we are willing to trust him even when we don't understand God's pace. Because in the end, Jesus' silences continue to speak, his calmness continues to teach, and the way he walks still reveals a peace that the modern world lost long ago. If you've made it this far, comment: this message was for me. I enjoy reading these comments because they show how many people are living this same journey of faith, waiting, and inner transformation. And, honestly, that creates something very special between all of us here. If this video helped you in any way to see Jesus more deeply, please give it a like. This helps this content continue to reach people who may need exactly this message today, amidst anxiety, exhaustion, and unseen doubts. And if you enjoy this kind of deeper reflection on the gestures, silences, and attitudes of Jesus that almost no one notices in the Gospels, you can subscribe to the channel Jesus Beyond Words, because there are still many revelations hidden in details that most people read too quickly. And there's a video here that greatly complements this message and will help you see another impressive detail of Jesus' life in a completely different way. Click on it and continue watching.